fault lines, earthquakes, wormwood, the ring of fire, magnetic shifts, and the possibility of a planet-wide shaking, we need to stop. We need to breathe, and we need to understand exactly what kind of conversation we are about to have. Because this is not just about one earthquake. This is not just about one fault line. This is not just about Arkansas, Missouri, or the Mississippi River. This is about a pattern in history, a pattern in scripture, and maybe a pattern in judgment. What we are about to talk about in this series is a theory, a layered theory, a theory built from geology, history, prophecy, cultural memory, fear, pattern recognition, and biblical imagery. Before some people jump in and say, "Are you saying all of this is proven?" No, that is not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that there are enough real events, enough real warnings, enough real ancient symbols, enough real recorded upheavals, and enough terrifying possibilities to make any watchman stop, look, and ask, what if the world is more fragile than we were told? What if the earth beneath our feet is not nearly as stable as what we pretend? What if prophecy and planet-wide disruption are not separate conversations? And what if the next major shaking is not random, but part of something much bigger? Because the modern world teaches you to live like nothing can really happen. It trains you to trust systems. It trains you to believe in permanent infrastructure, permanent supply chains, electricity, order, normal. But history does not agree with that illusion. Scripture does not agree with that illusion. And the ground itself does not agree with that illusion. Most people think apocalypse only begins in movies. They think disaster is entertainment, a plot line, a special effect, or a cinematic thrill with dramatic music collapsing cities. But the truth is, the Earth has already shown us glimpses. There is a fault zone in the central United States called the New Madrid Seismic Zone, and it runs through the Mississippi Valley region, including parts of southeastern Missouri and northeastern Arkansas. In 1811 and 1812, through that zone produced a series of massive earthquakes the USGS described as roughly in the magnitude of 7 to 8 range, and the shaking was felt over an enormous portion of the United States. During that sequence, ground deformation near New Madrid temporarily caused parts of the Mississippi to run backwards. Think about that. The Mississippi River, one of the greatest arteries of America, forced backwards, not symbolically, not poetically, not in a dream, not in a movie. Actually, riverbanks collapsed, land rose and sank, liquefaction blasted sand up from the earth, the ground convulsed like a living thing, and the people who were there had no modern framework to explain just how terrifying it really was. USGS documents those effects as part of the 1811 through 1812 sequence. So let's establish the first truth right now. We are not beginning with fantasy. We are beginning with memory. The Earth remembers what it has done before, and if it has done it before, then it can do it again. Now, here's where it gets deeper. Because when most people think about earthquakes, they think about California. They think about the West Coast. They think about the Pacific. They think about the famous danger zones. They do not think about the middle of America. And that is part of what makes this so unsettling. The New Madrid system is not on the Pacific Ring of Fire. It is an interplate seismic zone, meaning it sits inside the North American plate rather than at plate boundary. The Pacific Ring of Fire is a separate system surrounding much of the Pacific Ocean and is associated with plate boundaries, volcanoes, and major seismic activity. That matters, because a hidden threat in the middle of the country feels different. It feels buried, forgotten, like something sleeping under the floorboards of civilization. And if a major event struck there again today, it would not just be some local inconvenience. It would threaten bridges, roads, rail lines, pipelines, power transmission, river commerce, communication systems, distribution corridors. Missouri's Department of Natural Resources says a repeat of major New Madrid event could produce severe damage across the region, and because seismic waves travel efficiently through the crust and in central and eastern United States, impacts can be felt over a wide variety of areas. So now the question grows, this is not just what happened in 1811. Now the question becomes, what happens if that sleeping wound in the earth opens again in a world built on electricity, digital systems, food dependency, and just-in-time delivery? What happens when a nation that thinks it is stable discovers it is sitting on remembered violence? Now, this is where some people get uncomfortable, because geology feels acceptable, history feels acceptable, emergency planning feels acceptable, but prophecy threatens people, because prophecy does not just ask what can happen, it asks what it means if it does happen. And when Christians start connecting natural upheaval with biblical warning, people immediately panic, mock, or dismiss it. But Scripture itself uses cosmic and earthly disruption as part of its language. In Revelation 8, we read of great object falling from heaven called Wormwood, and of waters becoming bitter. The chapter also describes something like a great mountain burning, with fire being cast into the sea, with devastating consequences. Now stop right there. I'm not saying USGS is secretly preaching Revelation. I'm not saying a government geology map is a prophecy chart. I am not saying every earthquake equals immediate end times fulfillment. But I am saying this. When you read the Bible carefully, and then you study the real capacities of this planet, you start realizing that biblical judgment imagery is not childish mythology. It is vivid, material, environmental, physical, planetary. Bitter waters, falling fire, shaken earth, darkened heavens, mass fear, systems breaking, nations trembling. The language hits differently when you realize the world is actually capable of catastrophic chain reactions, and that is where this theory begins to build. Here is the theory we are about to examine across the series, not as dogma, not as a final pronouncement, but as the serious life of speculation. Layer 1. The Earth is less stable than modern people assume. The New Madrid earthquakes prove the central United States is capable of extreme seismic violence. Layer 2. Hidden systems can awake suddenly. A threat does not have to be on the nightly news every day to still be real. Layer 3. Local events can trigger broader consequences. A major rupture in the heartland would not stay local for long in a tightly interconnected society. Layer 4. Planetary disruptions may come in waves, not isolated incidents. This is where the theory broadens. Fault activation, volcanic awakening, ocean disturbance, atmospheric contamination, infrastructure collapse, poisoned waters, panic, famine, social disorder. Layer 5. Wormwood may be symbolic, or it may describe a real class of event. Basically, Wormwood is tied to bitter waters and devastation. Prophetically, some interpret that as a celestial body or a debris event, an atmospheric contamination event, or divine judgment. Now, again, to stay clean and accurate, the Ring of Fire is its own Pacific system, not the New Madrid. But in speculative theory frame, people imagine a season of intensified planetary unrest where multiple systems appear to wake up together. The NOAA describes the Ring of Fire as a major seismic zone and volcanically active belt around the Pacific Basin. Layer 7. Magnetic pole drift and reversal fears get folded into end-time speculation. Science does not confirm that Earth's magnetic poles move and that full reversals have happened in geologic history, but USGS says there is no evidence that geomagnetic reversals directly trigger extinctions, and the process would unfold over a long time scale rather than a single sudden movie-style flip. So for this series, the honest framing is, magnetic instability is a real scientific topic, but the catastrophic one-step instant doomsday pole flip is not the major science agencies describe. That does not stop people from tying it into prophecy. It just means we need to distinguish documented science from prophetic interpretation from internet exaggeration, and we're going to do that. Part 5, why people are drawn to this theory. Now, let's go deeper still. Why do theories like this grab people so hard? Because deep down, men know something is off. We live in a world that feels overbuilt and underrooted. We live in a world that feels hyperconnected and spiritually empty. Technology advanced and morally collapsing, comfortable on the outside but brittle on the inside. So when people hear about rivers running backwards, faults under the heartland, stars falling from heaven, waters turning bitter, volcano belt stirring, magnetic drift, strange weather, increased instability, rumors of wars, and a sense that the old normal is dying, well, it resonates. Not just because it's dramatic, but because it feels like it fits the mood of the age. Whether every theory is right is not the point. The point is that people sense fragility. They sense the systems of man are not eternal. They sense that comfort is temporary. They sense that judgment is not an outdated world. They sense that civilization can look mighty one day and helpless the next. And in that instant, the deep instinct is why these conversations spread, because men know the difference between entertainment fear and real warning. Part 6. Movies taught us to watch the sky, but not the ground. Now think about the movies. Deep Impact, a celestial object, a countdown, governments scrambling, the world's realizing too late it is not as untouchable as it thought. Armageddon, a civilization-level threat from above. 2012, a global upheaval, systems collapsing, the illusion of control evaporating. San Andreas, a dramatized earthquake nightmare. Don't Look Up, a culture mocking warning signs right until impact becomes unavoidable. These stories keep appearing because they tap a deep human fear that judgment or catastrophe does not ask permission. It interrupts, it breaks in, it humbles. And what the movies do with CGI and music history does with rivers, ash, flood, famine, shaking, and terror. The old world is always more fragile than it thinks. Part 7. Songs, symbols, and the fleeing of approaching storm. Then there's the music. Even the culture signs like it remembers. Riders on the storm, bad mood rising, dust in the wind. It's the end of the world as we know it. These titles alone carry the atmospheres. Storm, mood, dust, end. Culture is full of fragments, echoes, warnings, shadows of collapse. People laugh at prophecy while humming apocalypse in the background. That's the strange thing about this age. It mocks warning and it markets warning at the same time. So, let me make this plain before we go further. This series is not just, hey, here's a creepy fault line story. This series is about the collision of three things: real Earth history, documented seismic catastrophe in the American heartland, real biblical imagery, Wormwood, bitter waters, earth-shaking judgment, cosmic signs, real modern anxiety, a world that feels unstoppable politically, spiritually, geologically, environmentally, and morally. And that is why this matters, because when you put those three together, you get a question that will not leave you alone. Are these things disconnected, or are they pieces of a larger pattern we have been too distracted to see? Now, I want you to be careful here. I'm not telling you to live in fear. I'm not telling you to panic. I'm not telling you to worship disaster. A Christian watchman is not supposed to become addicted to doom. A watchman is supposed to stay awake. There is a difference. Fear paralyzes. Watchfulness prepares. Fear makes you spiral. Watchfulness makes you sober. Fear makes you sensational. Watchfulness makes you discerning. So as we go into the series, the assignment is not be scared. The assignment is pay attention. Pay attention to history. Pay attention to the geography. Pay attention to the scriptures. Pay attention to the language of judgment. Pay attention to the way man builds as if God never interrupts civilizations, because he has before and he can again. So here's where we are headed. In the next segments, we're going to break this down piece by piece. We are going to talk about the new Madrid fault zones, the 1811 to 1812 quakes, why the Mississippi ran backwards, what would happen if that system ruptured today, how central U.S. shaking travels farther than many people realize, how infrastructure dependence changes everything, how Wormwood is interpreted, how bitter waters fit the theory, how people connect seismic unrest, celestial imagery, and spiritual judgment, how the Ring of Fire gets brought into end-time speculation, how magnetic pole shift theories are often exaggerated, and what it all means for men trying to live awake in a sleeping world. Because once you understand the setup, the rest of the theory becomes much easier to follow. So before we crack open the first segment, hear me clearly. We are not saying every earthquake is Wormwood. We are not saying every rumor is prophecy fulfilled. We are not saying every theory on the internet is true. What we are saying is this: the earth has a history of convulsion. The Bible has a language of judgment. Civilization has a habit of arrogance. And men in times like these would be fools not to watch. The same species that builds skyscrapers also forgets floodplains. The same species that maps faults also mocks warning. The same culture that makes apocalypse movies still lives like tomorrow is guaranteed. But tomorrow is never guaranteed. Not to man, not to a city, not to a nation, and not to an empire. So this series is a warning, a study, a thought experiment, and a watchman's exercise all at once. We are going to examine the theory. We are going to test the pieces. We are going to separate what is known from what is guessed, and then we are going to ask the deeper question. If the ground under America has already shown us what it can do, if Scripture has already told us that judgment can touch land, sea, sky, and water, and if modern world is far more fragile than it appears, then how close are we really to a shaking that changes everything? Stay with me, because this is only the beginning.